Six. Get started here.
Yeah. Being here, I think. Well, I didn't know, like. Verify that, but that's what we're talking about today. I don't either. I didn't think I was doing that there, but that hard.
All right, can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Excellent. So thank you so much for being here. My name is Keith Phelps. I'm with UW-Madison Extension Forestry. We're here to talk about invasive species tonight, invasive species management. So just really quick, anybody know an invasive species off the top of their head? Look at that one. Great volunteer. Buckthorn. How about you?
Garlic mustard.
Garlic mustard. Excellent. Third one.
Honeysuckle.
Honeysuckle. Awesome. Those are actually what we are going to be talking about tonight. So I just want to review for the presentation where we're going to be going. First, we're going to review what's an invasive plant, common definitions associated with invasive plants. We're going to talk about changing forest conditions that we're seeing in Wisconsin, how that may affect the future of these populations of invasive plants. After that, we're going to review like 4 key invasive plants for us to consider in Rusk County. These may be species that you're dealing with already, or if you don't have them on your property, they're really good plants to look out for. And then we'll kind of look at native plants that we might misidentify with these invasive plants. After that, we're going to move into a discussion on management, talking about different management options for control of these invasive plants. Then we're going to talk about performing a plant inventory, actually getting an idea of the concentrations, the populations of plants on our property. And then we're going to end the presentation by talking about getting assistance for invasive plant management. So first topic, what's going to make a plant invasive? So oftentimes plants are introduced onto the North American continent, typically from Europe or Asia. Sometimes they don't really pose a problem. We kind of see them in the background. Other times they're going to spread and establish very, very quickly. So that's a key definition, common characteristic for these invasive plants. They have a tendency to outcompete native vegetation. So because they are spreading, they're growing so rapidly, they're actually causing a lot of beneficial native species to decline over time. So they're kind of outcompeting them in most forested settings. They're able to do this because they have little to no natural enemies. So back home, where they're part of the ecosystem, there may be pests or pathogens that can kind of limit their populations. Not so here when they're in a new environment. But most importantly, they have to cause some demonstrated harm to either the economy, the environment, the forest itself, or to human health. So we really look at those plants that are spreading and establishing quickly and have some demonstrated harm to the forest health or the economy. Some characteristics that we look for in invasive plants, by no means this is to say that all of these plants have these characteristics, but they're just some common ones that we see over time. So if you look to the left, there are some invasive plants that Ron pulled. We can see that the common buckthorn has a lot of berries. So a lot of these invasive plants produce a lot of seed. They produce a lot of fruit, helping them to establish very quickly. Oftentimes, these plants can be tolerant of many different soil conditions, so they can occupy different habitats. There are some invasive plants that really only show up in wet conditions. There's some that really show up in dry conditions, but generally, most invasive plants have an ability to tolerate many different habitats. They also have a tendency to germinate early. When we're looking at common buckthorn, oftentimes this can be the first species to leaf out in a lot of forested settings, and sometimes they hold their leaves on for longer. So that's called growing in these shoulder seasons. Oftentimes, these plants have root systems that can help them to spread, and some can even alter the soil conditions. So they're actually going to excrete some chemicals that can change the soil and really further their growth over other species. How did these plants get here? If we rewind the clock back, a lot of our woody invasive plants kind of got their start in the ornamental landscaping trade. I just pulled this document from 1908. This is a Minnesota catalog that was actively selling invasive honeysuckle and common buckthorn as hedge plants. So back in time, a lot of woody invasive plants kind of got their start through that trade. Some plants and woody invasives too, they were introduced through accidental means. They came over in seed or soil. Sometimes they were selected for use for livestock forage. Other times they were brought over for culinary purposes and they escaped and spread. Some were used for erosion control, actually. If we go back to the Civilian Conservation Corps days, if you've heard of kudzu down south, that was a species that was selected for its potential for erosion control because it could spread and establish very quickly, but then came highly invasive. Japanese knotweed in some small instances was also kind of selected for erosion control, but mainly it was brought over as an ornamental plant. Now, most native or most invasive species introductions are more due to accidental introductions. So if equipment isn't cleaned properly, seed is being spread by birds.
Hey, Keith.
Why should you care? Yes.
When did a lot, what time period, about what years did a lot of these invasives come?
That is a good question. I would say probably 1850s, but do you have a firmer date for that?
Yeah, a lot of it's like the late 1800s, which, what else was coming at that time?
Oh, people.
A lot of people from other countries, and they got here and they wanted to bring parts of their homeland with them. And again, like he said, it wasn't malicious or anything, most of these were. Thought they were doing the right thing and thought it was a good thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, these plants being introduced, people really didn't know. They didn't have the context to understand that they were going to escape, really cause these issues of spread in the environment. So looking back of why we should care about some of these invasive plants, here we see an unhealthy buckthorn thicket, like what these plants can do if they're really left to kind of get out of control. And in contrast, a healthier forest, by no means, this is all forest types in Wisconsin, but generally we can see that there's kind of a diversity of things going on in the forest. So some areas have a lot more shrubs, some areas have a lot more light, some areas have a lot more native trees that are coming up. In contrast, this buckthorn thicket is kind of creating a wall of buckthorns. So in effect, this can simplify the forest structure. We don't really have an opportunity for a lot of species to grow because there's that huge wall of buckthorn. In effect, this can also kind of decrease some wildlife food resources. So some species are going to be able to use these invasive plants. But because we don't have kind of, it's just a wall of buckthorn, we don't have some areas in the forest that are open, some areas that are closed. In effect, this kind of decreases the available wildlife habitat. Think of it kind of as a wildlife buffet. If we don't have that wall of buckthorn, there's more options for a lot of wildlife. This can also limit light to the forest floor. If we have that wall of buckthorn, that could create interference with light, meaning that it could impact tree regeneration. And buckthorn has a tendency to really kind of allow itself to be the only species that's there. So the buckthorn thicket just kind of recycles its growth and outcompetes a lot of desired native trees, but also other native species in the forest. So again, just in contrast, this unhealthier buckthorn thicket and what we kind of look for in some forested settings in Wisconsin, that clear overstory and areas where there's more shrubs, more native trees. Invasive plants, we said that they can also impact the local economy. I think it's really important to manage our invasive plants prior to harvest. If we think about a harvest, what's that's doing is it's creating a lot of light, a lot of ability for those invasive plants to take off and kind of outcompete the native tree regeneration and the native plants. If we are doing underplantings, that can lower our planting success. I kind of view this as an investment to ensure continued revenue over time. So if we are managing our invasive species, we are ensuring that we can continue to do forest operations into the future. Let's talk about some changing conditions and invasive plants. So when I'm talking about changing conditions, I'm really referring to wild, weird, wacky weather. We're gonna look at this, an example for Wisconsin with more extreme weather events, milder winters, and changes in our rainfall patterns. For more extreme weather, this is a really gross, disgusting graph. Just pointing you to the green bars here to show that there's been an uptick in severe storms. So thunderstorms, other severe storms rolling through Wisconsin. This graph is just showing changes in average winter temperature from 1950 to 2024. We're seeing an increase in average temperature in December, January, February. We're not seeing those kind of colder days in our winters as much anymore. What this translates to are milder winters, and it could translate to longer growing seasons. So an ability for spring to kind of come earlier, fall maybe to last a little bit longer, winters to be milder. Changes in rainfall patterns. This kind of varies across the state. In general, we're kind of seeing an uptick in winter rain in most areas of our state. And then in the summer, in the north, we're seeing kind of a trend towards some drier conditions. Central Wisconsin, we're seeing more rainfall annually over time. I will say too, we talked about those extreme weather events. More rainfall is kind of coming in intense rain events over the summer. So there's still instances of drought kind of in central Wisconsin.
You talked about a longer growing season. Is that the same with trees? In other words, will they have a longer growing season? Aren't they more controlled by light than by the weather? You understand my question?
Yeah, so these things can work in benefit for the native species as well.
But I'm talking about the trees themselves.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that- Okay.
Yep. So, reviewing kind of potential effects on invasive plants. This is just to say this is potentially things that we could see happening. So we could have that earlier access to resources, again, like earlier access to light, to soil nutrients, to water nutrients, could allow these invasive plants to outcompete those native plants. Because we may see a uptick in canopy gaps, the storm event might knock out some trees. If there are invasive species present in the property, that could cause an increase in those invasive species. But then we could also see range expansion. So range expansion, let's just take the hypothetical example of an invasive species hanging out here in the Midwest. If we throw in some of those changing conditions, milder winters, that could actually cause an invasive species that is kind of to the south of us to move north. So that in effect, that species is kind of allowed to kind of explore, establish itself a little bit further north. Scientists are kind of tracking this with some species such as tree of heaven, which is an invasive tree species to the south of us. Over time, it may show up in Wisconsin. So this all kind of goes back to the importance of prevention, things that we know that already work and are already really important to do when it comes to invasive species management. For timber harvesting, we have best management protocols. Oftentimes this means cleaning equipment. So loggers cleaning equipment, ensuring that they are preventing new species of invasive plants. As they're moving from forest tract to forest tract, cleaning that equipment, ensuring that there is no seed, no root system that could come and establish. Planting native species, preferring native trees is a good way to prevent the spread of invasives as well. And really getting into a habit of monitoring our woods annually, understanding if there are any new populations that crop up, anything new in our woods, and getting in the habit of doing that on a regular basis. So all to say, the future is uncertain, and managing invasive plants can be really daunting and intimidating. But I like to think any small action that we are doing in order to address invasive plants is really important for forest management and for us to do. Okay, I want to pivot now and talk about some important plants of Rusk County because we have some invasive plants with us here today. So first, we're going to review common and glossy buckthorn, which are species that you're probably familiar with, you may be managing already. So these are woody invasive shrubs. We identify common buckthorn. One of the things that I look for is the leaf edges. So the leaf edges on common buckthorn, they're gonna have small teeth on those leaf edges. The leaf veins are gonna be more U-shaped. There are gonna be some native species that have these U-shaped leaf veins. Contrast that with glossy buckthorn. Glossy buckthorn is a more kind of woody invasive shrub that shows up in more wetland forested settings. You may not see it as much as common buckthorn, but that's gonna have a smooth leaf edge. So just reviewing uplands and wetlands for that common buckthorn, it can kind of show up in both of those habitats. In contrast, glossy buckthorn, we're gonna see it more in wetland habitats. Reviewing some things here, these are perennial shrubs. They're gonna live longer than 1 or 2 growing seasons. They're often gonna have green leaves in the shoulder season. They might be the first to emerge in the spring. They might hold their leaves on longer in the fall. We also have blue-black berries that we can see on this specimen here. And then for common buckthorn, it also kind of has this yellow sapwood, orange heartwood inner bark as well. So that's something we can look at to identify. For management, a few things that we can consider. We're gonna look at management more in detail further in the talk here, but we kind of want to target female plants first. Those are the ones that are gonna produce those black berries and spread the seed to other areas of the property. So kind of managing those populations first is a really good idea. This plant is often gonna resprout. So it can resprout from the rootstock. There might also be seed in the soil bank. So it might kind of have a lot of seed in the soil already. So if we manage it once, it might come back requiring multiple rounds of management. For methods that we're gonna use without herbicide, typically we pull, cut, and dig in the spring. And for herbicide, I really like the cut stump method. So working in the fall and the winter, working with a chainsaw, brush saw, cutting those stems out, chipping or burning the brush, and then treating that product or the stump with an herbicide product, typically Roundup, Element, or Garlon. We'll talk more about that later. Similar native species, if we're working in wetland settings in northern Wisconsin, we might see alder-leaved buckthorn. This is gonna be kind of lot smaller than the invasive buckthorn. It is a native buckthorn. Black cherry, when it's small, can also be easily misidentified for common buckthorn. But I like to look at black cherry if you've seen kind of those fungus kind of things that appear on the branches of black cherry. That's a really good way to identify that over common buckthorn. Invasive bush honeysuckles. These are gonna be kind of the same height usually as common buckthorn. They're also gonna form dense thickets in the forest. They're gonna have opposite branching patterns, which means on the branch or the stem, on the left side of the branch, there's gonna be a leaf, and in that same location, on the right side, there's gonna be another leaf. We can look for shredding, peeling older bark as well. I can't really see the picture with thing here, so I'll just move it. We can see that kind of shreddy, peeling older bark structure. And then we can look for white and pink flowers, red, orange berries that can appear in the midsummer, are gonna stay on for longer periods of time. There's multiple species with these invasive bush honeysuckles, but these are kind of quick key identifying characteristics of those plants. For management, we're gonna treat it much in the same way that we would for common buckthorn, glossy buckthorn, woody plant. We can approach it pull, cutting, and dig, conducting that in the spring, and using herbicide, cut stump, just the same way we would with common buckthorn. Similar native species, sometimes there might be wild honeysuckle, which is more kind of a vine in our forested settings. There's also a bush honeysuckle, kind of in more drier soil conditions in northern Wisconsin. The bush honeysuckle is typically a lot smaller. It's gonna have yellow flowers as well. It's a good way to distinguish it. Garlic mustard. Garlic mustard is a biennial plant, so garlic mustard is going to live for 2 growing seasons. In that second growing season, it's gonna flower, seed, and then die. So it's that's kind of a important characteristic when we compare that to those common buckthorn and invasive honeysuckle. We're gonna look for triangle to heart-shaped leaves with this plant. These leaf edges are gonna be coarsely toothed, meaning they're gonna have bigger teeth kind of at the leaf edges. If you crush the plant, it's gonna have that garlicky kind of mustardy odor. The first years of this plant, because it's growing for 2 years, they're also gonna be very different. So in the first year, the leaves are gonna be smaller, 2 leaves, they're gonna be called basal rosettes. So a lot smaller than that second year, which is gonna produce the stem and then flower. For management, spring is the best window. That's when we see this plant flowering. Because it is flowering in the spring, it's investing a lot of energy in growing that flower. So if we mow it, there's less of a potential for it to actually regrow that flower. So mowing is a good opportunity to limit seed for this plant. We can also pull and bag isolated plants. This works well for smaller populations. We can pull that plant directly when it's in flower, bag up those seeds. Even if we pull the plant, this plant may set seed. So it's really important to bag it after we do that. We can also use spot treatments. So actually spraying this plant, it's called a foliar application. We really do this we can do this with the first years, those smaller basal rosettes, or just as it's kind of beginning to flower. And then we always have to kind of watch out for potential damage to other native plants, other trees that may be growing, and we'll review that a little bit more. Japanese knotweed. If you have not seen this plant, we got a really good specimen up here. This is a perennial plant. It grows up to 10 feet tall. Interestingly,
Which one's Japanese dog?
this one right here, this big one. With these small little white flowers.
And they're flowering right now, so you'll see them all over the country. Well, where they are, they're flowering right now, so you'll see white flowers.
Mhm. And we were discussing that typically we see them kind of like on roadsides. We don't really see them as much in forested settings. Oftentimes they can be around houses because this plant was also selected as an ornamental. So we kind of see it around roadsides, around houses. These plants, they can actually grow through stone. So sometimes they can even damage foundations of the house. So if we have it around our house, it's a really good plant to manage. We can identify it with the purple speckled stems that it has. It's also going to have hollow stems. These leaves are going to be pretty indicative, or they're going to be where they're going to be these kind of shield-shaped leaves with a flat base to the edge. And we look for those white flowers as well. And I like to think of this plant really resembling bamboo, especially when it's really young and growing up. For management, if we don't want to use herbicide, we can do a tarping method. So this is going to be mowing that plant down, tarping the entire population of the plant out 5 to 10 feet. We have to keep that tarp in place for a really long time, as much as 3 to 6 years, in order to limit light coming into those roots and allowing that plant to resprout. And we can reseed that area with native vegetation afterwards. If we are comfortable using herbicide, cut and treat is a really good method. We can mow those stems in late June or July, wait 4 weeks for regrowth, and then spray afterwards. Typically a milestone product works well for this. And then we can also use some cut stump methods, mimicking what we would do kind of with the woody invasive shrubs. And Ron.
And I guess one of the points about the spraying, it says they're sprayed before flowering. When I went and picked this one, this bush was humming with insects. They were really on those flowers. If you think about it, a lot of native flowers are kind of winking out this time of year. We still have plenty of flowers, but this is all of a sudden an eruption of potential food source for insects, and yeah, so that way we're not killing two birds with, well, a bird and a plant with one stone.
Absolutely, absolutely. Similar species to this native plant, I think spikenard, if you've heard of that plant, it tends to be kind of a woody shrub. We may not see it a whole lot, but it's got a very similar flower structure. This is native. This could be a great replacement. Or false Solomon seal. This might be a little bit more common where we see in our woods, but it's going to be a lot smaller of a plant. The leaves are going to be very different, and it's not going to grow nearly as tall as that Japanese knotweed. Managing weedy native invasive species. So sometimes in some instances, there are some kind of aggressive native species. Throwing some names out, here we see red elderberry, prickly ash, box elder is another common one. So these species can be very aggressive as well. They can outcompete some other desired native trees that we may want, such as oaks, such as pines. So these species may also be kind of important to consider managing. I like to think if we have invasive shrubs on the property, we should probably prioritize managing those first. These species, especially that red elderberry, can be a good native pollinator source. We may want to keep that. And overall, these invasive shrubs, they're going to be kind of the first priority to manage because they can get out of control, spread very, very rapidly. But in a lot of instances, if we do need to manage these aggressive weedy species, we can approach it the same way that we would with managing that common buckthorn or those invasive honeysuckles. We can pull, cut, and dig in the spring, and we can do cut stump methods to treat these plants, as well as some other options that we'll talk about. Okay. Moving on to management methods, before we kind of dive into detail about how we actually control some of these native plants, I want to pause here to talk about 4 Ps: prevention, planning, persistence, and patience. If we are doing invasive plant management, we want to get in the habit of preventing future introductions, so monitoring our woods, understanding what invasive species are there, what's changing over time. We want to invest a lot into planning. So we want to make sure that we are working to really understand what the costs, what the labor is going to be. We want to work in areas that are easier before tackling areas that are going to be a lot of energy to control. And then we want to have persistence and patience with the process. Oftentimes, when we're managing invasive plants, if the population is really robust, if there's a lot of invasive plants, it's going to take a lot of time to actually get them to more background levels in the forest. So we kind of have to have persistence, patience with the process. Hand pulling, this is really great all around. Small, isolated clusters of plants, individual plants works really, really well. We can utilize wood shovels for those woody invasives. So really great for targeted individual plants of many different species. Hand girdling, this is going to be a method we can use for woody trees. The idea here, and especially like soft bark trees, we're cutting off resources to the roots. And timing is going to be a really important method for this, June and July. I've really seen this method when we're managing aspen trees, which can be an aggressive native species in more prairie plantings or prairie kind of situations. So I've seen it there. But just caveat, this is mainly a method more in southern Wisconsin. Mowing, this is a good tactic for annuals and biennials. We can do spot mowing using brush trimmers. We can mow larger areas with UTVs, ATVs. Timing is going to be really important. We want to really target plants when they're just about to flower or in flower. We want to avoid mowing if there is seed present, because that's just going to fling seed all across the property. Forestry mowing, this can be good for large woody infestations, dense thickets, common buckthorn. We're just taking a mulcher onto a bobcat and mowing down those buckthorn plants. The mulch depth can impact native germination. And oftentimes this is a really good method to do in combination with an herbicide treatment. This is treating the stumps afterwards or in the fall and spring, doing foliar applications, treating the leaves of resprouting buckthorn, honeysuckle. Weed torching, can be a similar effect to spot mowing. The intent here is to prevent seed production, for some of those, forbs. Don't use this on high-risk fire days. And haven't really seen, I have used this some in my management with invasive plants, but not a lot. And then prescribed fire. So prescribed fire can be a management method for brush suppression. Prescribed fire in certain Wisconsin forests can also benefit other native species. The thing with prescribed fire that we need to keep in mind is we really need to understand burn permits, regulations. It's a very complicated endeavor that a lot of people will kind of contract out these services. We need to understand our fuel load, the wind direction. We need to understand relative humidity. There's a very complicated suite of decisions that come if we want to use prescribed fire. And oftentimes fire intensity is going to result in brush actively being killed. So over time, repeated applications of prescribed fire can suppress brush. But really, there can be instances where if we do a fire, there might be invasive plants that prop up because it is kind of a newly burned area, good opportunity for birds and such to bring in seed. Timing is going to be very important as well. Fall and spring are our typical burn windows in Wisconsin. Grazing goats, has anybody kind of seen anything about this? A little bit, heard about it. It's becoming a little bit more popular. Primarily, this is, I think it's a good method to think if we're going to be using it in combination with other treatments. So if we have goats come in and then herbicide application afterward, a word of caution, goats are going to eat everything. So if we have other desirable native species that we want to keep in the forest, goats probably may not be the best option for that. Herbicide. So sometimes people are really gung-ho about using herbicides. Sometimes people don't necessarily want to use herbicides or have questions. Both of those approaches are valid, but I just want to give you some thoughts for herbicide use. So I really think that herbicides can have a big bang for your buck. They can help us to have quick results in invasive species management. They can result in more efficient labor, and we can use this in targeted applications in the forest. And we can utilize modern techniques such as drone applications, which we're seeing a little bit more of. So I think of it as a really, really great management tool in our toolbox. The difficulty is we need to be sure to always follow the herbicide label directions. This is going to ensure that we have safety for ourselves, but safety for the environment. It's going to tell us how to properly mix up these herbicides. And then we have to be cognizant of the fact that there might be friendly fire on other native vegetations. We need to understand what the herbicide is doing, and we need to have an idea of the other plants that we want to keep in the forest. And we also need to ensure that we're mixing these herbicides properly and that we're maintaining equipment. Running through some different herbicide applications. So we have foliar applications. So this is using a diluted herbicide concentration. Commonly, this is used with backpack sprayers, ATV sprayers. For these foliar applications, I think it's really important to understand selective versus non-selective herbicide. So there are some herbicides like Roundup or glyphosate that are going to kill lots of different species. And then there are more selective herbicides like Element or Garlon, which is not going to harm grasses. So it's really important to understand what the herbicide is going to kill before we apply it and to our targeted plants. We need to be sure, just with every other herbicide, that we're mixing these herbicides properly. We want to use the proper protection. Reading that herbicide label is going to tell us the protection that we need to use. But a good rule of thumb is we want chemical resistant gloves, pants, long sleeve shirts, and eye gear. And it's really important to kind of calibrate our sprayers, make sure that the volume that we're applying is the volume that I want. Cut stump treatment, we talked about this a little bit when it came to those invasive shrub management. Here we're just using a chainsaw, brush cutter, and we're cutting those stumps and then actually applying an herbicide to the outside of that stump. That stump is going to move through to the root system. This is a great method to use in the winter and the fall. Common herbicides that we use for this are going to be Roundup, as well as Garlon and Element. We're going to use a more concentrated herbicide solution to do this. And just a word of caution that with glyphosate, typically we use water as the carrier. So if we're working in below freezing conditions, that solution could be a little bit goopy. In contrast, the Garland and the Element, we have a chance to mix it with more of an oil-based product, and we don't have to worry about that potential for freezing. Basil bark, we're going to use this with oil-based herbicide products. So those triclopyr, Garland Elements are good examples. Again, we're using a concentrated herbicide solution. This we can use on individual stems or trees, and instead of cutting the tree, we're actually spraying the stems of those trees all the way around that stem. Typically, I probably would say below 6 inches DBH is a good kind of cutoff point for basil bark. Below that, good to do. Above that, maybe better to do the cut stump treatment. Reviewing for selecting herbicides, we want to understand those application rates. There are lots of different resources to help you understand what the correct concentration of herbicide to mix and to apply is going to be. The label is going to help you do that. There are other resources. One of our attendees here has a handout that is really, really helpful for understanding those herbicide concentrations. And just to review, we want to understand selective versus non-selective herbicides and understand that some herbicides are going to be more effective against different plants. So we did not talk about this invasive woody plant, black locust trees. Milestone is usually going to be a little bit better for managing that species. You guys are doing great. Moving on to the next topic here, which would be inventorying your property. So in property inventory is just going to be a record of what's on the property. So we're going to include roads, property lines, water features here, and for our purposes here today, invasive plant populations. What we're trying to get at here is to understand invasive plant density. So where are the invasives most common and where are the invasives going to be scattered on the property? I think it's important to do this because it helps to monitor our woods over time. So we get a better idea of the current invasive problems that we're seeing in the property. And it helps us to develop an invasive management plan. So actually understanding the levels of where invasive species are more common in the property, where they're a little bit more scattered. And this helps us to kind of prioritize treatment areas. So where are we going to begin managing if we haven't begun managing on the property? And most importantly, because we're getting in the habit of monitoring our woods over time, it can also help us prevent future introductions of invasive plants. So this can be done using smartphone mapping software. We can use Onyx, we can use Avenza, if you've heard of those applications. If we're want to go a little bit low tech, we're maybe working in areas that don't have good cell service, or we don't want to use the smartphone. We can also create hand-drawn maps. We can print out an aerial photo and draw those populations of invasive plants, marking off features as we walk through the woods, and taking notes to kind of monitor changes over time. Again, kind of performing these inventories in kind of an annual cycle, I think is a really good habit for us to get in. So I just want to walk through kind of like an example inventory of what I'm talking about. So I would first start out just taking this example property here by sketching out an ATV trail. So I know that oftentimes recreational equipment can be a good way for invasive species to move throughout properties. So I want to be sure to mark off that trail. And it's someplace that it's a trail that I use to get to other areas of my property as well. So I want to ensure that I'm scouting out to ensure that there's no invasive species on that trail. There's a marsh in the northeast corner here that I'm gonna map off. There's also this really nice stand of oak pine woodlands. Maybe there's some blueberries in here, just a really nice piece of woods that I really like on my property. And then there are these high value conifer stands that I'm really interested in timber harvesting. So I want to scout out those areas and make sure that I have an understanding of the invasive species in those areas. In this example, red blobs are going to be common buckthorn, white is going to be garlic mustard. So we see that there are some isolated plants of garlic mustard around the ATV trail. We see that there's maybe 2 plants in that high value oak pine woodland. We got some small medium populations up to the northeast. Going over to the west, we see about 4 isolated common buckthorn plants, and then we have small medium plants or populations of that common buckthorn just the outside of it. And then we got this really big behemoth population kind of in the northwest there of common buckthorn. Doing this can kind of help us to prioritize or to figure out where we're going to start management. So to work more efficiently with our labor, we want to make sure that we are kind of targeting these satellite populations first. So we want to get a handle on those invasive plant populations. So that would mean that I would probably start managing these garlic mustard plants along the ATV trail in those high value areas of the woodlands. Then I would move on to these smaller, medium-sized populations. And then finally, I would attack that bigger population. So kind of moving through, making sure that I am prioritizing my management to take care of those smaller areas first. Talking about timing, planning a little bit more, I really think it's important to kind of look at the calendar of when plants are emerging. By doing this, we can really understand when we can use different management tactics and we can tackle different species in one year. So the DNR has these really awesome control calendars for your benefit. This allows us to kind of look at where species are going to be more vulnerable in the calendar year and to what methods: herbicide, prescribed fire, and mowing. And plants are going to be different in different life stages. So actually, and they're going to be more vulnerable. So actually looking at the calendar is a really great way for us to think more about our management. And doing these multiple control strategies, I really think of it as an effort for us to kind of limit the use of herbicide, to reduce costs. If we have really big populations of invasive plants, it can be very costly to do management. So making sure that we are prioritizing our efforts, understanding where we're going to treat in the calendar helps us to kind of balance out those costs. And this allows for more flexible, adaptive management as well, because we're not relying on just one technique, we're using multiple. Yes.
Is that calendar on the DNR website?
Yes, and I can scrounge up a link for you as well. I want to review some questions since we're kind of on the topic of thinking more about planning and kind of developing a plan. So some important questions that I would think about if we are trying to tackle invasive species on the property is where and when we're going to start treatments, what methods we're going to use. Are we going to use herbicide? Are we going to use mowing? Are we going to use a combination? How are we going to monitor progress? How are we going to know through our methods if they're working over time? And what are going to be our preventive strategies so we can clean our boots, we can clean our equipment. What are the methods that we are going to use to prevent new populations of invasive species kind of entering the property? And then most importantly, kind of like, what's our timeline? What's our schedule here? So tying this together to that example inventory that I gave you, thinking, just kind of spitballing some ideas for planning. This may look like, so in year 1, I'm really going to target those isolated populations of garlic mustard. Then I might mow maybe some of those medium populations of garlic mustard. In the summer, I'm gonna scout the property for more invasive populations, maybe things that I missed in the first go around. And I'm also gonna look into maybe some assistance programs that can help me with invasive species management, which we'll talk about a little bit later. The fall and winter, I would cut and treat those isolated populations of buckthorn. Moving on to the spring, I would go back to those areas that I did treatment, remembering and recalling that oftentimes there can be invasive seeds in the soil. So those could reemerge after year 2. So we just repeat, rinse and repeat, mow any of those garlic mustard populations that we see. And then we could treat any sprouts from that buckthorn cut stump treatment that we did in the winter with a foliar application. In the summer, maybe I look into prepping that oak stand for a prescribed burn, making some burn breaks, and I could also scout the property for more invasives in the summer as well. And then kind of following it up after rounds of management, after I've made improvement on those isolated populations. Over time, if I'm feeling comfortable monitoring, then I can start to work on that bigger population of that buckthorn. Maybe I'm going to use a forestry mower, or maybe I would in combination and kind of using that as the last thing that I would do for management. And then spring is just making sure that we are monitoring again, going through areas that we have retreated or treated in order to see if there are other invasives coming up that we need to do some more treatments on. Before we kind of close here, I want to talk about the benefits of native seeding and planting. So if we're in an area that has been where there's a dense population of common buckthorn or invasive honeysuckle, oftentimes there might not be a lot of native species in there. It might be a good opportunity for us to increase the native species, doing underplanting enrichment, fill in those empty areas. It's an opportunity for us to increase wildlife food sources, especially if we're doing mass trees, say our oaks or our berry producing native trees. I think it's really important if we are doing any kind of native seeding or native planting, first to talk to your forester, understand your site, understand the soil, the water availability, because that's going to determine what species you are will be successful in planting. And then we also want to look at what current species are in the forest and kind of having an abundance of other plants. Yes.
What would you suggest as far as prevention strategies? So in our township, they hire out the mowers that go along the ditches. And I mean, I guess I can bring that to our town board meeting, like if there's anything that they're doing to prevent the spreading or the timeline. But as far as like making sure that nothing is coming on my property from their mower that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say kind of something that we did not talk about is when we're doing the monitoring, it's really important to understand what's going around outside of your property. So with the example of the mower, it could be if it's just on the edge, actually like monitoring the edges of your property. And then that could be a place where we're seeing a lot of kind of those problematic invasive species moving in. So I would say kind of having an understanding of the context around your property is also really, really important. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, and I think it just, it brings up more of like what to bring to our meetings as far as like the things that we can do. With the people that, or the companies that they hire.
I have seen some mower resources where there are some calendars that like mowers also have, so they're kind of there are some resources where people have been kind of trying to tackle this issue to say, hey, this is when this plant is in flower. So there are some resources out there for like highway mowing operations.
Thank you.
Last topic, getting assistance. So there are multiple ways to get assistance, but I think your county forester is a really, really good resource for you. They're gonna have really specific local knowledge of invasive plants in Russ County. They're gonna have great recommendations. Their county forester is a really great resource for you.
Keith, could I just interject, so there's no confusion, not the county forest staff that work on the county forest, but like Ron Weber, Bob Hauser here, the DNR county forester.
Yes, thank you. My apologies. And the Midwest Invasive Plant Network Database. This is a really good resource for you to look up some different treatment options by species, to look at different herbicide application rates. There's also the UW-Madison Renz Lab, which has really good identification videos and fact sheets. If you're confused about invasive species identification, these are great resources that can help you. And in addition, they have herbicide application rates and treatment options as well. SISMAs are going to be regional partnerships. These can assist private landowners through education. They often have a lot of workday events or workshops, and their whole goal is to kind of coordinate invasive species management on county to county levels. In some instances, these SISMAs can also offer control, so they may be able to perform an invasive species application on your property. This is case by case basis. Often they have limited capacity to do so, and kind of connecting with these organizations are a good way to see if they can do that. But at the very least, they can provide you with a lot of information, technical support. And they may be able to assist in kind of applying for grants. So for cost share programs, these could be programs that are going to reimburse, help you through some of those costs of invasive plant management. Most are going to require a forest management plan to be in place. Some of the most popular programs are going to be at the federal level, NRCS EQIP or the DNR Wiffle Gap are two good programs. Ron, do you have any others that you kind of think about or point landowners to?
Boy, you got the big ones there.
Probably Nick, the owner at, the Department of Agriculture. And they've helped me with some invasive species and identifying.
Yep, Nick would be at the NRCS office there on the top with the equip grants.
Especially identification and actually coming out to your property
Mm-hmm.
and giving ideas on what to cut. And different types of management.
Awesome. Hiring a contractor, the DNR does have contractor lists. So if we kind of size up the problem, maybe we want to work with a contractor. Just as kind of a disclaimer, I think it's a really good idea if you are considering a contractor just to check those references, check their reviews. You want to ask when they can perform the work. And we always want to make sure that contractors provide some sort of liability insurance, estimates for the costs and the scope of work, and written contracts or agreements for you to refer back to if we're doing invasive plant management. Closing out here, if you're going to take anything away, I think some big things would be the 4 Ps, the importance of prevention, of doing some sort of planning before we tackle invasive plants. Then we also want to make sure that we are being persistent and patient with the process. So if we have larger populations of invasive plants, we just want to make sure that we're following those 4 Ps. And as a closeout, any kind of smaller steps that we're taking in order to think more proactively about our invasive species that may be present on the property, I think is a really big win. So any action that we're doing, an action is an action, no matter how small, when it comes to invasive species. So just want to try to inspire people if you're beginning kind of an invasive plant management journey. And with that, I think I'm going to close out and we will open up the room for questions. I know we covered a lot of ground. So we'll go to the room first, and then I think we'll go to some questions in the Zoom chat that are present there. So any questions in the room?
So for the honeysuckle and the buckthorn and everything with the berry, if you're gonna cut that in the fall or winter, do you have to do something so that the berries don't land on the ground? You have to collect them or can you just cut them off?
I really good question. I, if we think about kind of like the time it would take to collect, it's probably not gonna be worth it. I would say just kind of like removing those species, and creating those burn piles, treating the individual plant, that's gonna be kind of the priority there. I wouldn't necessarily invest a lot of time into collecting, those fruits, because then we have to think about where are they gonna dispose? We need to dispose of those fruits. Could create, little populations of honeysuckle elsewhere on the property.
I mean, in a perfect world, yeah, it would be a good idea to, what, not have the fruits laying around out there, but. If you could do that in
Well, I'm just wondering, just push them all into a pile with the tractor, or can you just cut them off and they have to leave them on the ground, or? You know what I'm saying? 'Cause
Right.
that's, when you cut them, all the berries are gonna be hanging on the bushes, should you push them together into a burn pile, or can you just leave them lay where they are?
well, the more you push them, the more they have to fall
True.
off.
Or throw them in a bucket and haul them somewhere, or?
I think either
Or
way,
cut them before you get the berry.
I
Yeah,
think either way,
That's
you're
actually the best way.
gonna have to go back to that site probably a few times, every year and just check it and, you're gonna assume that there's still seed there that you're probably gonna have to treat some seedlings coming up.
I mean, is this something you're looking to do like this fall, or? I'm just trying to think, if you cut them when the berries weren't even an issue, cut them in the winter, cut them in the spring. Cut them some other time, even if you can't deal with them, then.
Well, I just say this winter, if you're out there, it still has all the berries hanging there, you have to be real careful with them, or just whack them off and leave them.
That's too much of a micromanagement
It's a
thing.
seed, so ultimately,
I would just get,
Is that seed fertile as soon as the berry forms?
that I don't know,
I'd have to go back to see that.
I don't know that. And I'm not sure if the seed has to actually pass through a bird to get the seed coat. What's the word?
Usually when it's.
Scarified or whatever, in order to become viable. You have to
Mhm.
look into that.
Yeah,
90% of plants, what I've read is when the seed becomes ripe, if it was pollinated, it's fertile. But it has to become ripe first. So if it's early, before the seed becomes ripe, then it won't germinate. It's gotta be ripe. to
Mhm.
Germinate, gotta be fully developed. This is the way I don't understand. What I've read.
makes sense. Yes,
if we girdle a tree and let's say we're at, convenient. For a chainsaw, like 3 feet up, and then put the herbicide in, is that okay, or do we have to be right down by the ground?
nope, that's a method, so I just didn't cover that, girdling with the chainsaw. That is a method that we can also use for sure for treating, trees and treating, just as you said, probably you're kind of like diameter at breast height, or maybe a little bit lower than that, and treating around where you do the cut. Yeah, that's a method for control for, woody invasives.
What is that doing to the trees? It killing it?
Mhm.
What-
Yep.
Yeah, if you girdle the whole. Stump that's around the tree, it's gonna.
Should do it twice.
Or you can follow up with a
Mhm.
spray too.
What about
Just
just going
ensure
right through the tree?
don't stump.
You can do that,
Just
just so it doesn't land on your head.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could do that too, but that tree might still be alive, so it might kind of resprout, after you make that cut. So-
Unless you treated the stump,
Mhm, mhm.
I see.
Yes,
Can I ask a question about, an invasive species that hasn't been covered?
sure.
Okay, like, burdock and then the Scottish thistle.
Mhm.
I have a 7 acre pond and it's like, around it, it's just, that's all I've got.
Mhm.
So I contacted a prescribed burn company. I think we're looking at that. This, anything else, this it's, I mean, I have 45 acres now, basically it's thistle.
Mhm. That can also be treated with herbicide applications, if you're okay with that. Remind me for burdock. I should know this, is that gonna be an annual, biennial? Biennial, so we also have a mowing opportunity there as well.
Thank you.
Mhm. Anybody else in the room? Yes.
Oh. One area where I cut 4 acres of ag alders.
Mhm.
And there was the lowland, burdock, and there was the lowland, a lot of lowland invasive species. When that tag alder come back, it took over everything. It even took out the buckthorn, the lowland. I mean, we cut them stumps, it come up back so thick, 10 sticks come from every one stump. And that's a native species, but it actually, in my woods, in that particular area, it actually knocked out everything else, including the invasives, everything. There is a few blue beech left and there's some hazelnut
Mhm.
left. And that was it.
Mhm.
So what do you think of tag alders around the country? They're one of the super invasive native species.
They're good for wildlife.
Mhm. Did you wanna respond?
Well,
Or-
the tag elder I had, they came in and they cost shared with me to cut it all down, so that resprouted for the. Is it rough grouse, I believe, a little bit,
Mhm. Mhm.
and maybe some other. But one thing I observed is that in my forest, and maybe Russ County isn't the greatest place to grow black walnut. But when I came across a black wall, I came across an area, and I thought, there's not much buckthorn here. I looked up, sure enough, there was a black walnut. So whatever that's worth, black
Mhm.
walnut, buckthorn doesn't like black walnut.
Mhm. Speaking to like tag alder or to these black walnuts, sometimes depending where we are in the state, like, yeah, these can be kind of some of those aggressive species that can kind of, that are native, but they can kind of pop up a lot. And myself, I really haven't done a lot of with tag alder. But I would be curious to, for Ron, and for our foresters in the room, what do you kind of think about with tag alder?
Well, I think it's gonna be, it worked out good, Mike, for you, and it may work out 80-90%, but it may not work on every site. Cause, yeah, tag alder's gonna be a lot like aspen, you cut it, it's gonna come back thick, and
Aggressively.
exactly. And so that new growth, if it grows, it's coming off an already established root system, it's gonna be able to come back very quickly and shade out other, maybe, invasive plants that might have been there. But that might not work every time, I guess that's the point, that might be site dependent.
Yeah, I think it depends if it's upland tag alder or
Right.
lowland tag alder.
Mhm. Mhm.
The one thing that I did notice in there is there was, some swamp white oaks that were about a foot high, cause this was 2 years ago, and now they're about probably almost 2 foot high that have come up in there, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
They're a feed tree, produce good acorns for wildlife. So I noticed them did survive with the tag alders so thick.
Mm.
Which,
You might wanna clear a little around those, give them a little light.
that's what I'm gonna do
Mhm.
this year. Yeah, as soon as fall leaves come on, we'll go back through it, look around.
Absolutely.
Can you go back one slide on your presentation, or maybe two? No, you were good with the 4 keys,
That one?
yeah, right there. So why do you got the first one in bold letters?
Mistake on my part, sorry.
Oh, no, I don't think it was a mistake at all, I mean, old adages are old adages for a reason.
Mhm.
An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Mhm.
If you can prevent invasive species from getting a stronghold or a foothold. Forget the stronghold, even a foothold on your property, you're way ahead of the curve. And kind of like Keith was saying with your management plan and scouting. Where's the first place to look on your property?
The edge.
The edges. Any trail edges, road edges, field edges. Look at the edges, scour the edges and make sure you're not letting anything creep in. And then work your way inward. Because most likely, that's where this stuff's gonna come from. And so that prevention to me is so important. In the next month and a half, you're gonna have an opportunity to really do some good scouting for one of our most noxious, woodland invasives, and that's, buckthorn. Because as Keith alluded to, buckthorn will keep its leaves way into October, into November. And so you walk around your property in November and you see trees with leaves on it. It's most likely, and they don't turn colors, so it's gonna be green leaves. It's gonna be a buckthorn, 99% of the time. There are a few other natives that hold their leaves a little long too, but 99% of the time in late October, November, it's gonna be a buckthorn. So that's a perfect time to get out there and walk your property and really scout those out. And, then like he said, if you got a phone app that you can drop a mark there or a waypoint there, so you know exactly where it was next year, hang some ribbon, whatever it takes. Remember those places and then take some of the steps to try and get rid of them before they get a stronghold. I had a friend that had buckthorn on his property, and I noticed that when it wasn't that bad, I mean, it hadn't just got there, it had been there for a while, but he still had opportunity to get the upper hand on it. And I, suggested, yeah, Jamie, you really need to get on this, and, he didn't right away, he waited. And, 5-6 years later, he had 3 times the problem he would have had if he would have got on it right away. So that prevention, I can't overstate it, it is so big in invasives.
I really like this discussion, the addition of the edges and the question that we had about mowing, like that is a really important thing that I kind of left out in that example, right? Of thinking about where are the edges on the property, what's happening outside, and what are kind of some invasive species that might be creeping and moving in. So great addition.
And just one last thing with your little slide here, cause I like it all, the planning, we already talked about that, once you know you have to deal with something. But also, you have to be a bulldog, you have to have persistence and that patience. Don't give up on it, because once you give up, then most likely it's gonna be a bad outcome. As he said, as Keith had in the one slide, every bit you do is gonna help. And so, just saying I've had enough, I'm done with it, then nothing good's gonna come from that problem. Unless we're talking about garlic mustard. You wanna bring that up at all?
I think that this would be a great thing, yeah, because we were talking about this, and somebody else in the room, had a podcast about. Just kind of summarizing it, well, we had that slide about garlic mustard management, right? Mowing, pulling, spraying the herbicide. There's some research that's saying, well, maybe if we kind of let those populations grow over time, it might kind of recede. So the populations might kind of decrease over time. This is actually, if you've heard of the Silvacast, this is a podcast of Wisconsin DNR state silviculturalists. They had a guest on who was talking about this.
Yeah, and this idea has been around for a number of years, and it's just basically getting at a organism's limiting factor. That once it becomes so populous in an area, it eventually uses up something it needs to actually keep going, and then it just crashes. So there is good, it makes sense that it would work. It's not gonna work with all the invasives. That one, I would be very careful about doing that with buckthorn or Japanese knotweed or anything like that. But with garlic mustard, it seems to have some hope. because that's one. You know, the garlic mustard seeds, I don't even know if we know for sure, it's at least 7 years, it could be upwards of 10 years. That the seeds are viable, and so, and one plant can create thousands of seeds. So actually getting it eradicated may be a pipe dream, that may never happen, even if you went out there every year spraying and pulling and cutting and whatever Keith told you to do, you still might not be able to get it all. Probably better to do what Keith said, identify those little areas where you know it's a small enough little pocket. I can take care of this, but if it's through 10 acres of your woods, that's probably too much for you to ever treat, mow, pull, etc. So.
Mhm, mhm.
I'd just like to comment that if you're gonna control some of this stuff, and you got a harvest plan, control it before the harvest, because the harvest is gonna open up forest, a lot of sunlight,
Mhm.
and that's when they really take off.
Yep, yep, yeah, going back to that kind of discussion on like, how are these invasives gonna affect forest health, forest damage? I agree, I think getting a control prior to harvest is a really, really good strategy. Yes,
When, birds and animals eat some of these seeds, does that kill them, or do they all go right through them and the scat leads to more spread?
scat can lead to more spread. I've seen some mixed kind of research about, some people say that buckthorns might cause like distress for a lot of birds. Have you kind of seen this, Ron? Do you have any opinion on that? I would kind of say there are a lot of bird species that can still kind of feed on the invasive plants that are probably going to be okay. I think that I don't want to kind of say yes or no without kind of seeing some of those studies.
Mhm.
But
I've seen bear scat with,
mhm,
buckthorn. Berries, seeds in the scat,
mhm,
so I know that bears eat some of it and
mhm,
spread it around. I don't know
mhm,
how much, but I've seen it before.
mhm. We have some, and this is a really great question. We have some great wildlife extension specialists at UW-Madison, so I might kind of take your question up to them. Yes.
Is there a good app for identifying and treating?
For app identification, Maps can be good. That's a good one for kind of documenting a native plant. It helps kind of efforts across the country as well to get an understanding of populations of invasive plants. There are like plant identification apps as well. If you've heard about iNaturalist, that's one that I would kind of refer to. The iNaturalist, like those photo identification apps, I would just put a little disclaimer on that to say that oftentimes they can be right and sometimes they can be incorrect. So just make sure that you kind of have another source that you can confirm that that's that correct species. When we're doing plant like inventories, Onyx or Avenza, I've used more like kind of like Avenza myself. But I like those apps because we can do points, we can do lines, we can do shapes, and we can write little notes to kind of understand more of like the invasive plant populations, if that makes sense. So there's more options, I think, available with some other mapping applications.
I just looked up real quickly about the poisoning of the birds, it's more of a, it's not really true. It doesn't hurt the birds,
Mhm.
hurt any birds. All it says is that buckthorn berries have a laxative content in them that make the birds pass them very quickly.
Mhm.
And so they poop them out very fast,
Mhm.
which makes them a very efficient spreader. Some species more than others of the seeds. And that, since they pass through them so quickly, they don't get a lot of nutritional value out of it.
Sure, yeah,
So,
yeah.
they're not really getting much for eating, I guess.
That's kind of what I've heard as well, more often than not, so to be like, yep, it might be more of a laxative, but it's not kind of causing distress for the
Right.
animal, but it results in it being spread, very quickly.
That's what I was gonna say, it's gonna spread all over. Put it out fast.
So I'm just gonna pull up our chat here. So it looks like we have some chats. And apologies here.
Can I address a question Ken asked earlier,
Mm-hmm,
Keith, while you're looking
mm-hmm,
at? Ken, you had asked about the effect on the trees.
Yeah,
Yeah, it would, so, you know, if you think back like to the summer, or I'm sorry, the spring of 2012,
mhm,
when all of a sudden, you know, we had, 10, 12 inches of ice in the first week of March. By the second week of March, it was almost gone because the second week of March became 70 degrees, and then March stayed 70. I don't know if you remember this, but it was 70 the whole month, 75, even 80
yeah.
in March. We had trees leafing out in
Oh, I do,
early April.
yeah,
I mean, I was out my first turkey season, it was leafed out.
yeah,
And so, you're right, photo period is extremely important, but we can have variations, especially in those shoulder seasons,
mhm,
where it can extend or shorten, depending on what kind of weather you have, based on what kind of weather you have.
sure,
That year it caused leaves, so the trees were growing actively, because why not? We
yeah,
have warm weather and, yeah.
and enough sunlight to.
Exactly, we had enough, so that they,
they-
and another good example of that is, I went up, muzzleloader deer hunting up on the Apostle Islands. And down in Cable, Wisconsin, this was in October, down in Cable, Wisconsin. This first week of October, the trees were already blazing colors, leaves were falling. Got up on the Apostle Islands and the trees were still mostly green. And just starting to turn color.
Because of the weather,
Just because of the microclimate of the lake.
got it,
So on those shoulder seasons, it can extend, but we're not gonna have maple leaves in February.
yeah.
But for periods there on the shoulders, it can.
So in a way, that's kind of helping the trees, I suppose, as long as they don't freeze out though. And
Right, well, that's the problem with that
that early
spring.
frost or late frost, then it might kill the leaves. that come
Exactly,
in.
we've had that several times now. We get calls from people because their oaks. Or other trees leafed out, and then all of a sudden you get a hard freeze and the leaves die. Well, they'll reflush,
Yeah,
but, people are worried that the trees are dead now and it
Yeah.
just takes time and they'll come back, but.
Makes more energy, a slow growth season, what I read. When a tree freezes,
Oh,
them leaves, for them to come back out, then they don't grow as much that year, because
Right.
they need the narrow rings.
Yep.
Don't necessarily mean it's been dry or hot, or good or bad growing, but it can also mean an early frost too.
Yeah. And sometimes the leaves that come back are big and all those things that can affect tree growth. So it's a stressor.
mhm.
There's no doubt about it. Over the last 10 years, 15 years, our trees have been under incredible stressors from weather. Just weird weather,
Mhm.
from droughts to too much rain, non-winters. You name it. I mean, our trees are really being stressed, so
Mhm.
it's the way it is.
Then kind of going back to that, those stressing events and the kind of like compounding stressing events that can really affect the overall health of those native trees. If those invasive plants are hanging out, they're, doing fine, that's an opportunity for them to kind of outcompete. Let's see, we're at a little after 7:15. There's some interesting questions in the chat here that Tony is tracking. I really like this question. Does anyone have a success or failure with invasive species that they'd like to share with the group? If not, that's okay. kind of show of hands, who has been managing?
I've been doing it for. Well, the box elder since the early nineties,
Mhm,
and the basil treat of the box elder has been very successful.
mhm.
And buckthorn is something I've been doing maybe the last 5 or 10 years. And I was using the basil, but it's kind of slow, so I went to the foliar this summer. And I was using less chemical that way, and also I could use water rather than kerosene. And that seems to be working better, but it is overwhelming.
And say, it's a war.
Yeah, yeah,
It's a war. Every time we go out there, it's. Just looking and checking and. Figuring out what you're gonna do.
Making those decisions to prioritize, like, okay, where am I gonna start? What makes the most sense? Like, what is my capacity too? Like, what can I do? And with this big problem, breaking it down into those smaller steps where we can do some progress on the land, I think is great.
One
But
thing I think that was pointed out to me is that we had areas where there was a pine plantation. And there was an area where there were the hardwoods, and the people I was with from the DNR were saying that we should go into the hardwoods because there we can do the timber stand improvement and get it open to new hardwoods coming in. Whereas the pine area was kind of, we're waiting for the next harvest in the pine and they're just gonna come back. So sometimes it's good to think about what makes the most sense. And in this case, regenerating the hardwoods made more sense than to go into the pines and try and control it.
I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah. Thinking about what are the other management decisions, how that could affect managing invasive plants. That could be where are we gonna start, where are we gonna hold off for now. For Ron, this is from Tony in the chat. If I have a bunch of invasive species, let's say buckthorn, honeysuckle in my woods, I want to control in the next year or two, what's the process and timeline for getting a DNR cost share to do the work myself? Big question.
The timeline might be hard to predict to get a DNR cost share. In order to qualify for the WIPL, the Wisconsin Forest Landowner Grant Program, you have to have either a management plan or a stewardship plan. So that would be step one. You would need to get a stewardship plan written or a management plan written, one or the other. A stewardship plan, and Keith, there are programs out there right now, right, for having a free stewardship plans written.
There are, yes.
Okay, so maybe
Yep.
you can share that because you're more in tune, I think, with that program. So that would be step one. Then, once you have that stewardship or management plan, then you can go ahead and apply for a wiffle gap and, or that grant. You could just go on the DNR website and look under Wisconsin Forest Landowner Grant Program. And it will show you, it will give you it'll give you information about the program. It will give you, the application process. Then it's a matter of filling out the application and sending it in. And then those applications are looked at on a, as received basis. And awards are granted, so it just depends how many applications are in the queue when you happen to apply. Cause it's first come, first served, basically, so I can't say it will take a year, it might take 1 year, it might take 2 years to actually get the grant awarded. Does that answer Tony's question?
It does. That's great. Yes.
Looking up there at Nick with the Department of Agriculture, they had me cut 1 4-acre area. And I decided to do it myself, because I was a logger, but I cut it, then I planted it with white pines. And I got a grant for that. So there are some grants that maybe you could get through them.
Yeah, that's another great source, the NRCS offices locally. They also require a plan in place though.
Mhm.
So
And the NRCS can, if you do not have a forest management plan, they can
They can
help
write.
you to write one.
yeah,
Yes.
One thing, I'd like to bring up is that there's a CSP program.
Mhm.
And that's sort of a program where all your woods are included and you have to think of some practices.
Mhm.
And the cost share on that is not near as good as the equip program,
Mhm.
which is, you know, you don't have to include all your land, and you can pick out a piece. The cost sharing per acre is much greater.
Mhm.
And so don't make the mistake of signing up for CSP and giving yourself all kinds of work where the cost share is low, where you could sign up for the equip and get a better cost sharing rate.
Mhm. And my understanding is EQIP is if we kind of have not worked with the NRCS before, EQIP is usually the track that they put landowners in. CSP is kind of where we've more graduated out of EQIP, tack on another thing, if that makes sense. So
It's-
oftentimes
It's
starting
more like
out-
a maintenance type program, whereas equip is really tackling the problem.
Sure, sure.
Like kind of like we said.
Mhm. How are we feeling in the room? We're close to 7:30. Now I wanted to.
everybody's depressed.
Oh, yeah, I know. It's hard for me to talk about it myself too, because I'm up here, I'm getting nervous, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I hate to be the bearer of bad news.
I'd like to say in some areas where I've controlled it, and the native species do come in,
Mhm.
and, you know, so it's nice to see that happen. So
Mhm.
it does happen, but it takes a lot of work to get there.
Mhm. What native species have you kind of seen after you've done these treatments? that-
Well, I found that, you know, in my area where the black walnut grows well,
Mhm.
that I've seen that come in, and I'm trying to promote black walnut.
Mhm.
One, like I said before, buckthorn doesn't seem to like to grow under it, and two, it's a species that can get through a lot.
Mhm.
And
So that's,
black walnut does produce juglins, which
which
does
is probably,
kill
Mhm.
other plant species.
Yeah.
around it.
Mhm.
Maybe it kills buckthorn.
and it's a very valuable tree if you can.
Yeah, it's a valuable tree.
Mhm.
I've also found that swamp white oak is really aggressive grower. I was
Mhm.
having a lot of problems growing like red oak, because deer would eat it. And I put swamp white oak in and it would hang in there, and the deer didn't seem to eat it, and it grew fast.
And things grow.
It's not so good a wood as a white oak, I've been told though.
Mhm. And when we were thinking about the tag alder, like it's a great tree that can grow in more lowland settings as well, that swamp white oak. Grow fence. Yeah.
I also had come back, what I used to have a lot of was the hazelnut brush.
Mhm.
Which does produce nuts for squirrels and everything,
Mhm.
and blue beech. And then ironwood. Ironwood grows really slow, it takes forever, but for it to get established it's a nice tree to have around.
Mhm. Mhm.
Ironwood, you could see an ironwood that's maybe 6 inches across, it maybe 80 or 100 years old.
Mhm. Mhm.
They're real slow growing and kind of rare getting to be.
Not mine.
Yeah.
Forester has me covered.
It's so hard with.
Forester has a-
Forester's out there in the land.
They're also found where the woods were pastured a lot,
Mhm.
because the cattle didn't eat them yet.
Mhm. Speaking to the forester who might disagree with the ironwood, can you say a little bit more about that?
Oh, just that we're having some challenges in some of our hardwood forests with some regeneration, with ironwood out competing on other more desirable species, so. We're kind of looking at different options, eliminating and reducing some of the ironwood growth in some of these hardwood stands. Through shearing, or, you know, if we're having a timber harvest, we're, you know, designating that all the ironwood is getting cut with the marked hardwood trees too, so. We're finding it to be a pretty prolific spreader in certain areas of the forest, county forest, River State Forest.
And it just forms such a dense lower canopy under the upper canopy that very little light gets to the forest floor then.
Mhm.
Way less, and so your hardwood species that are trying to grow there just have a tougher time.
Mhm.
As we talked about last week, sugar maple can tolerate that low light, so it'll keep growing, it's just gonna take longer. We don't have this pretty old forestry saying, we don't have forests of just big ironwood forests. Cause eventually the other trees grow up through them and get above them. It just takes longer. And, you know, Mother Nature don't care if it takes 300 years to put a forest on its landscape. But for us, if you wanna have you know, you want woods in your lifetime, you want the woods, your hardwoods to grow a little faster.
Mhm, mhm.
And the deer don't seem to browse the ironwood as much as they do some of the other
That's
species,
starvation.
so, yeah. Grouse might come in the winter, but the cat.
They're
Yeah.
really hard to kill.
Yeah.
They're almost impossible to kill, some things. Ironwood.
And this is the tricky thing about balancing that, right? So in some areas of the forest, like having that ironwood, if it is kind of replacing, say, a common buckthorn, that could be a good thing. But in other areas, if it is competing, maybe with tree regeneration, that might be causing kind of, it could be seen as maybe kind of an aggressive native species in some forestry settings as well.
If you wanna kill ironwood, use that basil bark spray with garland for
Mhm.
it. I've killed a lot of it with that.
Yeah, that's the benefit about working with herbicides is we can kind of tackle those invasive species and we can kind of tackle some of those aggressive native species.
Another control method they're piloting or studying is show some idea, there is some, it might be working. They're actually going through and they're cutting the ironwood or musclewood off at about 3 or 4 feet tall, leaving these stuff, and it's, so. I saw this really neat device, it's almost like a leaf blower that hooks on your back, or a weed whip, but it's a brush saw. And you can just walk it, you know, it's on your back, you can just nice shoulder height, so it's very easy to use, you whack these things off. It'll sprout back because it's a very vigorous sprouter. So it'll sprout back off that cut area, not stump sprout, but off that cut area. But those then will, the second year and the third year, it just gets less and less successful and eventually just dies out. And so, but then you got all these stumps all over the place, but
Better than the big tree.
exactly, better than that thick lower canopy under your forest.
Kind of connects back to your comment, of just whacking it off
Yeah.
halfway.
Yeah,
So,
Yeah, we're gonna.
well, yeah, well, if there's
Well,
no,
thanks for coming.
yeah, if there's not a whole lot of questions, I'm gonna stick around. Feel free to take off. There's all these resources. If you want to learn more about invasive species, herbicide applications at the front here. Thank you so much.
Cookie on your way out.
Yeah, grab a cookie.
This Brown's got even more money.
see you can.
Or yeah, between these beats.
Sure.
Yes.
What's up? Very good.
What's that?